Welcome again in the course of organic production. We are still in the lesson of soil fertility management. It is somehow a very long lesson because soil, it's not simple. Soil fertility, it's not simple too. And many factors and human practices can impact it. Being important and being not simple, this brings us to a long lecture. Even we have not for sure discussed everything because it is thought or it is presupposed that you have the basic knowledge. However, I could not put the concepts related to the organic agriculture or fertility management in a very friendly way without mentioning it. Even somehow I just passed through them. This slide is just presented in the previous parts of this lecture, but I wanted just to remind you. So we are in the soil fertility management, in the crop rotation and use of legumes. Now, factors that are considered for planning rotation. You have the basic knowledge because I have presented them previously. Here is just to have a guide. I mean, it's like some tips that you have to consider when you are thinking about crop rotation and managing soil fertility. In case that you are planning a rotation, I wanted to remind you that you always have to include green manure and cover crops in order to prioritize the production of biomass. And this is in order to improve soil cover and organic matter content. So, for example, why to have soil cover? It is important to protect the soil by erosion. Of course, have other benefits, but here we are concentrated mainly to the benefits of rotation. The same species should never be sown on the same field in the following season. And you know, we spoke in the previous part about monocropping and monoculture. The green manure and cover crops should be adapted to the region's microclimate. You know that the climate change and we have microclimate because position, because territory, I mean relief, if there are mountains, hills, and so on. So the green manure and cover crops should be adapted to the region's microclimate, to the soil characteristics, and we have spoke about the soil characteristics, the farmer's production system, and the benefits of cash crops. Speaking still about the factors that we have to consider before planning a rotation. Another one is labor and equipment demand in the certain period. Because we can have, for example, two different options, two plans that are the best option for the market, for the land, and so on, in two different fields in the same period, and it can happen that have the same or the high need for labor and the same equipment. And in this case, even it is could be a best option, we cannot do it in practice. So it is important to consider these two. In order to plan crop rotation, the effects of one crop on the following should be taken into account. For example, root system have to be considered because different root systems have to be planned in order to have how to say the impact of building the soil fertility or soil building capacity. Other one is to be considered compatibility with the following crop. So the compatibility of a plant with the following crop that will come after. For example, if we plan to put tomato and then potato or vice versa, depend on the place and the climate, it is not advisable because they are from the same family, they have almost the same pest and the same diseases, and this is not good for not only for the soil fertility, but it's not good because of the infection, the possibility of infection in the future of the other crops that will come after. We have to consider degree of resistance to attack by pests and diseases. We have to consider through rotation to have a better control on disease, weed and pests. We have to consider the biomass production. So another factor is the biomass. In general, it would be good with plant with high biomass in order these leave residues in the soil, and in this case we can increase the organic matter content in the soil. We consider nutritional requirements of the plants in order, in this case, to conserve nutrients. And in general, we consider that after, for example, a plant that leave the soil rich with nutrients, to introduce another plant that can take these nutrients. Otherwise, especially for nitrates, for example, we'll have the phenomena of moving of nitrogen fertilizers or nitrogen nutrients to water through, for example, runoffs. When we are planning a rotation in the farm and in the field, it is important to consider some plans that or some practices that it's better not to use in a certain period or not to use at all. For example, the literature suggests that it's not advisable to use alliums, brassicas and potatoes in the same land for a period of 48 months. That means for 4 years. This period is considered from planting date to planting date. What else? Continuous cropping of alliums, brassicas, and potatoes in greenhouses. It is not good, so I don't advise them. What else? Cropping systems which rely solely on outside inputs for nutrient supply, weed, pest, and disease control. This means that an organic farm that wants to establish fertility of the soil is not advisable to be dependent on the outside supply for all the factors. The fourth is we don't advise, we don't suggest that to use continuous cereal rotations. So we have to have a kind of break between different cereals. Speaking about root system soil building capacity, techniques that help to build up the soil are different. We have to ensure a balance of catch crops like cucumber, oilseed, radish, arugula. Both last have biofumigant and trap qualities for nematodes, and soil conserving cover crops like, for example, clovers, legumes. However, the association has to be planned carefully. For the other side, interrow catch crops has not to compete the main plant for water and nutrients as well as not competitor for light. Deep-rooted crops, sweet clover, alfalfa, cotton. I'm saying cotton, but in our areas is not so common. Tomato, cucumber, carrots should alternate with shallow rooting crops like cereals, lettuce, onion, garlic, other greens, in order to help keep the soil structure open and assist in drainage. Here down, you have a useful link about this. What is a catch crop? Because previously I mentioned a catch crop. A catch crop is a fast-growing crop that is grown between successive plantings of a main crop. Example, between the spring harvest and fall planting, or between rows, especially with vegetables happen this. For example, radishes that mature from seed in 25-30 days can be grown between rows of most vegetables and harvested long before the main crop matures. Are used to minimize nutrient leaching and increase organic matter production along the year. We are still speaking about root system soil building capacity during planning the rotation. Another advice that is offered from literature, from the practice, the practice in the farm, on the farm, there is, for example, alternate or do alternation between crops with high root biomass like rye and low root biomass like, for example, oats or vegetables. Pasture grasses with their high root biomass provide soil organisms, particularly earthworms, with food. Alternate crops that are high moisture water users like corn, cotton, cabbage family, eggplant, with plants that require lesser amounts of moisture like barley, potatoes, cereals, onion, garlic, peas. Plants with slow growth rate, like tomato, onion, garlic, must rotate with fast-growing ones like sweet corn, spinach, lettuce, radish, or other greens. Allelopathic crops, for example, rye and sunflowers, should be alternated to prevent a build-up of their natural chemical toxins, because then it will damage the other plants. Plants with high amounts of residues or waste, such as legumes, fodder, cereals, celery, onion, must rotate with those with low amounts of residues, such as potatoes, cauliflowers, cabbage, greens, spinach. As I presented previously in previous slides, when we have to plan or when we are planning the rotation in our farm and in our fields, another factor that we have to consider are nutritional requirements of the plants that we are planning to sow, with the objective that we have good production level, we conserve fertility, and in this case we are conserving the nutrients. It's not, how to say, um, helping the soil fertility if we plant plants that do not use the nutrients, and in this case, for example, like nitrates or other nutrients, are moving through runoffs or through leaching to the waters. Because in this case, as you know, we have losing of nutrients, and from the other side, we can have the pollution of the waters. In this case, nitrogen is the major nutrient and care regulator of ecological processes. A considerable percentage of nitrogen fertilizer never reaches the crop. It loses in atmosphere as nitrogen gas, nitrous oxide or ammonium, or to the groundwater as nitrates. Most of the losses happen when there is no crop on the field. After the crop, for example, is harvested to the new plant, from seeding, in this case, plant create a canopy over the soil. An organic farmer priority is to prevent loss of nutrients and to improve soil fertility. Techniques that help to conserve the nutrients are, for example, avoid leaving the soil bare by planting cover crops and undersowing, so under the big plants. For sure, the plants we can sow in this case, the plants that can tolerate the shadow. Plant green manure crops. Alternate nitrogen fixers like legumes with high nitrogen consumers, corn and winter wheat. Legumes are an essential part of the crop rotation. They should appear often in the crop rotation plan. Another tip, another advice is pasture can be introduced if the case in the crop rotation. To be nutritious and palatable to the livestock should contain a wide variety of grasses and legumes, so not monocropping or monoculture. Store manure to prevent nutrient runoff and use composted manure. Heavy feeding crops should be followed by medium or light feeders. Division of crops into nutrient demand categories for rotation purposes, which are, for example, heavy feeders. Heavy feeders are corn, sunflowers, canola, we have noted in our area, as I know. Oil radish, winter wheat, spelt. Medium feeders are spring wheat, oats, rye, winter barley. Light feeders are spring barley, flax, buckwheat, soybeans. Here we have a very interesting table. In the left column, you have you have plant families. Then the respective species for their families, what kind of feeders they are, and at the end, which are the plants that we advise to follow them, or what is advisable to do after them. Okay, let's start with the first, with onion family. In this family, we have the most known species that we use in agriculture are garlic, onions, leeks, and shallots. They are considered light feeders, and because of that, they are used after heavy feeders or after soil enrichers like or such as beans. Speaking about cabbage family, the important species that are included in this family are broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, Chinese cabbage, collards, grass, kale, kohlrabi, radishes, turnips. They are considered, as you saw even previously, heavy feeders. Since they are heavy feeders, they should follow legumes. After these family crops, it, it is advisable, or we can suggest to uh, to be fallow for a season, or plant a cover crop and add plenty of compost and organic matter. When we have lettuce family, like artichokes, endivia, lettuce, chicory, they are considered again heavy feeders. So when we have cultivated this, or when we plan to cultivate these species, the literature advised that you have to plant legumes after them. When we plan to plant the beet family, like beets, spinach, Swiss chard, that are considered heavy feeders, again, we advise to follow them with legumes. When we have planned, or when we are planning the Graminaceae or grass family, which includes grains, corn, oats, rye, wheat, and because they are considered heavy feeders, we advise to follow these crops with members of the tomato or, in general, Solanaceae family. Still speaking about what we have to consider regarding conserving nutrients when we are planning a rotation, or when we are doing a rotation plan. Bean family has beans and peas, clover and vetch. They are considered light feeders, so they leave the soil rich. They give to the soil more than they take from the soil. These crops enrich the soil and are considered soil builders. Plant these crops before or after any other crop family. So it is important. Tomato family or Solanaceae family. This family have these important species that we cultivate: eggplant, peppers, tomatoes, and potatoes. They are considered heavy feeders. So in this case, we advise that to plant these crops after members of the grass family and follow these crops with legumes because uh, we have to enrich the soil before planting other plants. Squash family or cucurbitaceae. It includes cucumbers, melons, summer and winter squash, pumpkins, and watermelons. They're considered heavy feeders, and this is a reason that we advise that to plant these crops after members of the grass family. Follow these crops with legumes. As you see, it is the same as tomato family or Celonaceae family. Carrot family includes carrots, celery, anise, coriander, dill, fennel, parsley. They are considered light feeders. These crops can follow any other group. Follow these crops with legumes, onions, or let the garden to stay fallow for a season.